All right, let's talk about one of the wildest, most expensive bets in the history of tech. Back in 2016, Microsoft made its biggest purchase ever, and it was for a company so many people found, well, kind of cringy. Wall Street just could not figure it out. So today, we're going to dig into that story. Let's get into it.
$26.2 billion. Just let that number sink in. That is what Microsoft paid for LinkedIn. That's more than they shelled out for Skype, way more than GitHub. At the time, it was just a mind-blowing amount of money for what was essentially a professional social media site. An absolutely staggering number.
So that's really the big question we're going to unpack in this explainer. Was this a moment of pure genius from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella? Or was it maybe the most expensive corporate blunder we've ever seen? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock all the way to the beginning.
See, to really get why this acquisition seems so nuts, you have to understand where LinkedIn came from. This thing was no overnight success. In fact, it was the total opposite. It was a bit of a failure to launch. Okay, so picture this. It's 2003. The dot-com bubble has just spectacularly burst, and that's when LinkedIn launches. The founder, Reid Hoffman, was literally calling up his old buddies from PayPal and begging them to sign up. The growth was, well, it was painfully slow. For 2 whole years, the company was basically just wandering in the desert trying to figure out how in the world it was going to make any money.
And this slide just puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? After its first year, LinkedIn managed to get 500,000 users, which, okay, sounds all right? Well, that is until you see that Friendster, which was the cool kid on the block back then, had 3 million. LinkedIn wasn't even in the same league. It was a rounding error.
But, just surviving isn't enough. You have to actually build a business. And after years of just fumbling around, LinkedIn finally figured out how to turn all those professional connections into cold, hard cash. But it definitely wasn't a straight line. They tried a bunch of things that just completely face-planted. They tried running job classifieds, but they just couldn't compete with Monster.com. Then they tried to charge people just to connect with other people, and yeah, everybody hated that. They even tried licensing their data, but it just wasn't going to be a big enough business.
And then, around 2005, it all clicked. They made 3 huge bets that basically changed everything. First, they started selling premium subscriptions to people who wanted an edge in their job search. Second, and this was the real game changer, they built LinkedIn Recruiter for companies. And third, they created a B2B ad platform that was totally unique.
Now, this is the really genius part. This is the heart of it. Why would a company pay thousands and thousands of dollars for LinkedIn Recruiter? Well, think about it. Every single time you update your job title or add a new skill to your profile, you are basically working for LinkedIn for free. You are personally maintaining their product, creating this incredibly valuable, always up-to-date professional database. That was their secret sauce.
But even with a great business model, the path that led to that Microsoft deal was littered with some truly spectacular screw-ups. I mean, mistakes that put the whole company on the line.
117 million. That is the number of LinkedIn accounts that got exposed in a gigantic data breach back in 2012. Now, at first, the company said it was only 6.5 million, but the real, devastating number, that didn't come out until 2016. Yep, right around the time Microsoft was sniffing around. A huge, huge hit to user trust. And then there was this masterpiece. In 2013, they launched this app called Intro, and for it to work, you had to agree to route every single email you sent and received through LinkedIn's own servers. I'm not kidding. Security experts basically called it a man-in-the-middle attack on yourself. The whole thing was pulled in less than 6 months. It was a total disaster.
So let's just put ourselves in Microsoft's shoes for a second. When they were looking at buying this company, they weren't just seeing the good stuff. They were seeing a history of major security blunders, a bunch of failed products, a messy retreat from China, and, of course, the problem that never goes away, all that cringy, humble-bragging content that clogs up your feed.
So, with all that baggage, we have to come back to our main question. How in the world could Microsoft possibly justify paying $26.2 billion? Well, as they say, the numbers don't lie. So let's look at them.
You have to remember what was going on at the time. Microsoft paid a 50% premium on LinkedIn's stock price, and that was for a company whose stock had just been hammered, falling by half earlier that same year. I mean, on paper, it looked like they were trying to catch a falling knife. It looked insane.
And, well, this chart pretty much tells you everything you need to know. When Microsoft bought them, LinkedIn was making just under $3 billion a year. Fast forward to 2024, and that revenue is $16 billion. That is 5.5 times growth in just 8 years. It's now one of the fastest growing parts of Microsoft's entire business.
So, the verdict? Microsoft didn't overpay. Not even close. They got an absolute bargain. That $26.2 billion investment has turned into a business that some people estimate is now worth well over $100 billion. And it's woven into the very fabric of Microsoft's entire business software empire. So yeah, the acquisition was an undeniable, absolute home run financially. And yet, the platform's biggest, most human problem is still there. From a business perspective, it's a powerhouse. But culturally, it's still the home of those performative, "I'm thrilled to announce" posts. So, was the deal a mistake? Absolutely not. But the question of whether LinkedIn can ever become a place that professionals actually enjoy using? That's a whole other story.